Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, have you ever been sick and tired of being sick and tired? Have you ever thought about taking yourself out? Have you ever set a date to take yourself out? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today with my brother Paul. But something I want to say is, as you guys know, if you follow me, you know I'm 100% real and 100% honest. I almost took myself out a couple weeks ago after my friend Mike took his life. If it wasn't for my wife, my Lord and Savior, and his book, I probably won't be sitting here today. So, guys, if you're listening to this, this is going to be some hard conversation to hear, but it's going to be well needed because we're losing up to 22 veterans a day. Now, listen, guys, and that's only with 50% of the states recording suicides. That's not including drinking themselves to death, car accidents. So we're losing up to 50, 55 veterans and first responders a day to this epidemic. And if you listen to this episode, by the end, my brother and I, we're going to be able to help you not become a statistic. And guys, and if you stay till the end, his book is going to be available, and I'm offering something that if you spend $30, you're going to get $1,000 in bonuses if you stay till the end. So my brother Paul is an amazing author. As you guys know, I've read over 6,000 books. I have 18 books going right now and 2 audio books, and his book is in my top 5 of all time. He's not only an author, he's a speaker, he's a veteran, he's a brother in Christ, he's a husband, he's a family man, he's everything that I want to be. So welcome, my brother. Welcome to the show.
So, Richard, it's great to be here, but you forgot one thing. I am the best looking guy in my AARP club. Okay.
You got that down. Yes, you should be on the cover of ARP magazine every month.
Right. How about this mug?
Okay, so let me ask you a question before we even get started, brother. What is your definition of resiliency?
My definition of resiliency. That's a great question. I guess it would have to be my ability to never truly quit. While I've given up, I've pretend quitted a million times. I've never truly quit anything. No matter how many times I've quit, I've never truly quit. So for me, it would be never giving up, never quitting. And I mean, I'm telling you, I've been as close to ending my life as anybody else could be, right? So I think it's quitting. I think it's the refusal to quit, no matter how beaten, battered, bruised, ripped apart, tortured I've become or I've been. I just have to say that resiliency to me is the refusal to truly quit, regardless of how many times you've quit something.
All right, so let's hop in the DeLorean. Let's go back in the Wayback Machine. Tell us a little bit about where you come from, where did you grow up, and tell us how you became the force that you are today.
Well, so I was born and raised in Connecticut, and I was born out of wedlock, and my mother ended up marrying a guy who I ended up figuring out that I needed to tell the story of my young life from an age of 3 or 4 until I'm about 14. That's my first book, 2,442 Steps to Crazy. And that talks about the challenges of being an abused child and so on. But I was homeless at 14, in the military at 17. The Navy tried to kill me a couple times. That didn't take. I was discharged, and I was sent to the VA, and those folks are still trying to kill me. But, like I said earlier, I refuse to quit. So it's been a colorful and an adventurous ride that if we had 12 hours of nonstop me telling you what I've been through in my life, still wouldn't cover a lot of that ground. So it's an interesting story.
All right. So let's go back. Like I said, I think me and you kind of run neck and neck with a lot of similar paths. And, because a lot of people don't realize that adults that act out. Now, guys, I'm not a professional. I'm a ninth grade dropout, so I don't have anything hanging up on my wall except my DD 214. But I've had now we're up to like almost 1,300 interviews, and I found out that the average, when an adult acts out, it's usually because of trauma that happened between the ages of 3 and 13. And then you add alcohol to the mix, not all the time, but some of the time. And then you add military to the mix, and it becomes the perfect storm. So I grew up in an abused household. And for me, books were my solace. That was because I can read a book and I can go anywhere in the world. So that's where I became addicted to books. So as you were growing up as a child, you remember what your solace was?
This is going to really sound crazy, but God, the spirit world. I was surrounded by a tremendous amount of spirits, and that was what kind of, I'd like to say I've always had one foot in this world and one foot in the spirit world. But for me, looking backwards, my solace was literally a mix of or balance between the baby Jesus and my Native American heritage and my belief in Great Spirit. So I used to pray daily before I truly understood what praying was. I was asking the ether, God, for help in my life. And that's it. I couldn't read, so I didn't read books. And I didn't really have anything outside of that abusive family life. It was pretty isolating.
Okay, so then you said you became homeless at 14, joined the military at 17. So there's a 3-year gap. Talk to us about the gap.
Yeah. So in book 2 of the Crazy series, that book's coming out here soon, but that one kind of fills in the gap from 13, 14 to my time joining the military. But for me, I got lucky enough where a family had decided to take me in. So I was homeless. I was living in a cemetery, if you can believe that. And between some folks in the community who knew what were going on and some friends, I got lucky enough and I was blessed enough where after a period of being homeless, I was offered a place to live in an environment where I'm still extremely close with the 2 daughters of the 3 children in that family. And the father was a Marine. He was a Marine during Vietnam, and he helped me in ways that nobody else offered. So I say time and time again, if it wasn't for that family, I would most likely be dead or in prison. I'd kicked around in the foster system for a period of time, and that was a bloody nightmare, and I hated it. And I would disappear from those places as fast as they would turn their heads. So I got very lucky, very lucky. Again, you would think that I would have stayed out of trouble between 14 and 17, right? But no, I didn't. And there was a gentleman who had a beautifully manicured tie and a perfectly tailored suit. He liked to put this black robe on whenever he stepped up on this elevated platform with his hammer to conduct business. Well, that gentleman wanted to see my enlistment papers. So that's kind of where the enlistment at 17 came from.
Okay, so let me ask you a question because, and as you see, I'm writing stuff down because I do have a traumatic brain injury. If I don't write it down, I'm going to forget to ask the questions. But
All good, Sir Richard.
You've dealt with talking to people with PTSD, anxiety, depression. Now, this man, this angel that helped you was a Marine. Did he deal with anything? Did you see anything or notice anything, or did you notice anything now that you might have thought of if he struggled with PTSD at all?
I got to tell you, he and another family, one was an Army guy and one was a Marine. The two of them, no, even looking backwards, they managed to make it through their time in the military. And one of them that was in the Army went in right at the end of World War II. So I think he enlisted in late 45 or got drafted in late 45, whichever it was. But the Marine, no, he was a cook, and he showed no signs of PTSD or any of that. And I never really had a conversation with him about it. Even when we buried him, there was nobody saying that he had struggles or had troubles so I like to say and talk about, how trauma affects all of us so differently. And this guy that took me in, it was almost like God had rested his hand on his shoulder and said, listen, I'm not going to make you go through any of this PTSD or any of this other stuff. I need you to help some other people. And that's what he did all his life. And because of how he took care of me, it opened my eyes and my want to be able to go help others in the same way. And I've worked hard all my life to give away anything and everything I could, and I can, to help others, especially former military.
All right. So for me, and I sent you my book, and you have it. Yes, it reads like a third grade wrote it because I wrote it. So there's a lot of editing crap in there I have to do. But I'm like, what? It sounds like me, so I'm not going to edit it at all. But for me, my thought process, it was jail or the military. And I did both, unfortunately. I went to jail and joined the military at the same time. So what was it like getting off the street, having 3 hots in a cot, getting paid? So what was it like joining the Navy?
Well, let me come at that from two directions. First, when I was taken in by this family, as I'm thinking the timeline out, I can still feel the difference between walking into that loving environment and everything else I had been through prior to that. Okay. It was an incredibly different experience to be 14 years old and to have an actual bed, actual food, okay, and be cared about and worried about in a motherly and fatherly and sibling way. I'm not saying my sisters and my brothers didn't care about me and all that. I'm not saying that. But once you get out of that abusive environment and you can see what else is out there in the world, it truly is life-changing, just like going to boot camp, right? So when I stepped off the bus, and again, stepping off the bus for my first experience in boot camp was met by Shore Patrol looking for me because my crazy stepfather had caused more issues for me even 3 years after I had left that insanity. So my first adventure in the military was dealing with the aftermath of that rat bastard still trying to, in my world, kill me or make my life as miserable as ever. But once I cleared that and got assigned to a company, company 181, right? You never forget certain things, right? But boot camp to me was a piece of cake. I mean, I always say I went into boot camp in better shape than I came out. They appointed me as Master at Arms. So I was in the barracks running the 80-man company from, for 12 hours a day. And, it was a piece of cake. And getting yelled at, man, I watched people freak out because they got yelled at for whatever reason. To me, I had to kind of bite my tongue from laughing because their form of yelling, was nothing compared to what I was up against and what I can imagine you were up against, Sir Richard.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about that, because I struggled probably the first week, and then I realized, wait a minute, all the abuse I've gone through, all the hunger, all the sleeping outside, you're going to yell at me? That's what you got for me? And that's when I realized, wait a minute. And I don't like to curse on the show, but it's my show, so I can. I realized it was just a mind fuck. And once I realized it's the mind game, like one of my boys, Triple H, said, it's time to play the game. So that's when I learned to play the game, and I played it really well. So how many years did you put in, and were you deployed anywhere?
Yeah, so my hitch was for 6, 4 active, 2 reserve. At the end of my 4-year, when I was debating re-enlisting, I was dealing with injuries and waiting for Navy to issue their findings on my injuries. And again, so for me, at the end of 4 years, I got discharged to VA, and then VA issued me a disability. And I kind of lost my train. Where were we going with that?
Well, I just wanted to know how long you put in, and then if you were deployed at all, and how did you get hurt?
Yeah, so I spent 4 years on active duty. 3 years, 2 months were attached to the fleet, and 2 years, 1 month of that I was deployed. So if you ever saw the movie, The Hunt for Red October, did you ever see that movie?
Yep, love that movie. Love the book. The book was even better than the movie.
So watch this. Okay, I was on that boat, USS Dallas, SSN 700. In fact, when I was on the boat, one of our quartermasters was dispatched for 2 weeks in Hollywood to be a technical advisor for the filming of the damn movie. So I spent 2 years. I spent 3 years plus on that boat, and 2 years of it, 2 years and 1 month, we were deployed.
So, Paul, how'd you get hurt?
Well, I got hurt a couple of times, but the one that really kind of did the most damage was we had slipped out of one of our op boxes, and we were doing transfers in the middle of the ocean. And if you guys remember, do you remember the Walker family who sold all our cryptography?
Yep.
They sold it all to the Russians. Well, we ended up having to slip out of, tracking Russian subs and all the other things that submarines do, to take a short run surface and get our orders, because they were coming in paper and writing, because they didn't want to, they couldn't take the chance of sending them out there with our crypto being compromised. So on one of those transfers, I was up on the top of the boat doing the transfers. I got caught as a wave came up, took me up, sucked me under the boat. And if you can imagine a surface ship with its hull and a submarine, which is round, 2 of them came together and tried to squish me to death. And then for me, the next thing I know, I remember looking up and seeing about 1.5 feet water. And then I started hearing the crunching, and that was it. That was the last thing I remember, with one exception. Next thing I know, I'm about 30 feet above the boat, looking down as 3 guys are pulling my body out of the water. Okay. That's it. And I knew there was a powerful entity, spirit, to my left. I can still feel it today. Okay. But I couldn't turn and look around. I could only watch. I could sense what was around me, but it was like my head was locked down towards watching myself get pulled out of the drink. And next thing I know, it's 30 hours later, and I'm waking up in my rack, and I'm kind of climbing out, and I'm like thinking this thing out, and I'm like, wait a minute, man, am I dead? Am I alive? Oh, great. So heaven is another submarine. I'm back on duty, right? And anyway, turns out it made me up pretty good, but it didn't kill me. So I always look at it as one of my early exposures to miracles, because for all practical purposes, I should have been dead. I should have been fish food.
So what was the reason for them medically discharging?
So I wasn't medically discharged. I was medically retired. All right. They wanted me to stay in until they figured out what was wrong. And I said, I'm not going to go sit in the barracks. Well, you guys spent who knows how long. So I worked it out so that my full 4-year active time was completed. And then they discharged me to VA. And it sounds like a lot longer story than it really is. I mean, I had gotten hurt a few times. And again, I was waiting for the Navy to make a decision on, what the hell happened. What I was looking for is I was looking for answers. I wanted to know why I was, what they were going to do to heal me, to fix me. I had a spinal cord issue and my legs were going numb and so on and so on. But I was thinking that their plan was to, medically find a way to take care of what happened to me. But the reality was they were evaluating a disability, right? And again, when you're 21, you don't know this shit. You don't know what's going on. So I didn't even know what a disability was until I went to the VA. You read that in the book, A Date with Suicide. Had my meeting with a in a closet with a guy I'd never seen before, and a period of time later, I get a letter in the mail that says, you're a disabled vet. And I got to tell you, Sir Richard, I remember this as I'm talking to you. As I'm looking at that at the mailbox, all of my energy and power was about to crinkle that stupid disability rating up and throw it away. I don't want to be a disabled anybody, right? Let alone a disabled vet. You look at the hospitals and you see what this country does to its disabled vets. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be labeled a disabled vet. But that voice that talks to us, it said, don't do that. Hold off. So I as I started to crinkle it up, throw it away, I kind of opened it. And that was a defining moment in my life where now I get to look back and say that was the starting point of both my battle and my education with the Veterans Administration, the DOD, and how this game is played.
Okay, so talk to us, because what is it like mentally as a 21, 22-year-old kid? For me, it's a kid. I mean, it's a man, but it's a kid for me. Going from not having 3 hots in a cot, now you've traveled the world, you've been everywhere, you ate some great food, met some great people. And like one of my friends, Sergeant Nick, talks about, he says, when you step off the boat, nobody gives a shit about you. Your phone stops ringing. You don't have a paycheck. Most of us don't have a paycheck. A lot of us, we lose our camaraderie. We lose our mission. And then we either end up at looking at the bottom of a bottle or at the end of a barrel. So what was it like at 21, 22 years old, having to figure out what's next?
Yeah. In hindsight, it was brutal. But at the same time I say that, for me, again, I have a tremendous faith, and there was always something inside of me that kept saying, keep moving forward, keep the faith, there's a plan. Okay. Now, again, when you're dealing with the issues of life, saying that simple statement is not always productive or helpful. But when you learn to truly lean on your faith and belief and trust that there's a plan, okay, it can transform you over time into trusting the unknown. Okay. So for me, when I left when the gate at the base hit me in the ass and there was, no ceremony, none of that stuff, you're just on your own. I had a sea bag. I had roughly $2,000, my stored up leave time, right? And I owed no money. I had a $8,900 truck that I had bought brand new 2 years earlier. and a square box of all my worldly possessions, sea bag, square box, and a 2-year-old truck. And as I'm leaving the base, I'm kind of realizing, I'm like, oh, shit, I'm homeless again.
And, you know, because so a lot of us, when we get out, and that's why this podcast is what it's all about. It's all about having to reimagine and reinvent yourself. No matter if you put in 3 days, if you put in 20 years, once we hit the streets, we're private Joe Snuffy. We're back to square one. No matter what rank you held, you hit the civilian. You're just another Joe. So how did you go about reinventing and starting to reimagine your life?
So I did the same thing most of us do, you know. I kind of walked out of the military thinking I'm somebody, you know, I accomplished something pretty impressive, right? You know, and that lesson of nobody cares, you know, started slapping me in the face quickly. And in a matter of a short window, I realized that I'm truly on my own here. There is no help. There are no options. Again, you got to remember this. This is, you know, like you, this is back post Vietnam and 20 years pre 9/11, right? So the attitude towards veterans was horrible. I mean, that all changed 9/11, and all of a sudden veterans become heroes again, like after World War II. So you didn't really talk about being a veteran, and veterans told you, you know, keep it to yourself. Okay, it's people will be brutal to you. So that piece of what I should have felt with pride and honor and respect and so on was stripped from me. And my battle with the VA, and you know, as I note in the book, my first exposure to the VA carved a slice across the back of my skull that looked like the Grand Canyon, except it was full of blood, right? So for me, the transition from military to civilian took forever, and I'm still not figuring out the full I've still never fully transitioned to a civilian.
So okay, now because I want to spend the last half hour or more talking about your book. I know I can tell you, and it's in my book. No, actually, I didn't even write that in my book about my suicide attempt. I guess that's going to be for another book. But for me, I know exactly the moment when I attempted suicide. It was Memorial Day 2012 when they told me I'm no longer Sergeant Kaufman. Well, I got thrown out the first time, got back in, did everything I can to be the ultimate soldier for 23 years. And now I'm no longer Sergeant Kaufman. Well, who's Richard? Who am I? Because we all know that when we were in the military, if we got pulled over, we never showed our driver's license. Everything was our military IDs. That was our identity. And I think a lot of us, when we get discharged or retire, we no longer have that identity. And for me, that was the day that I attempted suicide. So you've talked to a lot of people. Have you heard the same things?
Yes. There's one guy I served with that left. His EAOS hit. He left the boat. We've never heard from him since. Nobody knows where he is. His family called the boat trying to find him. They said he was, he left there with the intent to go home. His family never heard from him. We never heard from him. And that was that now 40 years ago? So yeah, your story is so common, so to speak, that it's almost shameful that we haven't figured out a way to solve this problem yet. And hence, that's why I'm writing a book, a series of books on the subject, starting with the first one in the series called A Date with Suicide.
So talk about, because me and you are both Christians. We're both unashamed Christians. Christians. We love our baby Jesus.
Baby Jesus, baby. Gotta love your baby Jesus.
So talk about, okay, because a lot of people will tell you, well, tell me about your attempt. But for me, when I talk to somebody like myself that has attempted, I always ask them what the day before their attempt was like, what their day after the attempt was like, and what the day of the attempt was like. So take us back to those 3 days.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, Sir Richard, I'm a little bit of an anomaly here. I never set a date, right? I spent decades actively trying to kill myself, but in the same breath, when it got to certain points, I would quietly slip away. And as I mentioned in the book, I would sit there with the opportunity, the means, and the intent to kill myself. Okay. But I never finished what I started. Now, in the same breath, if you look at, well, let me straighten that out a little bit. If you're sitting there with a gun or a noose or pills or a knife or whatever the method is going to be, all right. For me, when I got to that point, there was always that voice that was saying to me, yeah, man, we got shit for you to do. We need you to do stuff. Okay. So this isn't going to happen. All right. No matter how much I wanted to finish what I started, something kept pulling me back, something internally. And I owe that to the spirit world, to God, to his warriors that walk around that help us. Okay. That said, I can't tell you how many times, I got to be careful how I say this, reckless driving, if I drink 650 beers in an hour, will that finish the job? As I say jokingly at times, my wife would go to the VA with me because I warn people all the time, never go to the VA alone. Never go to the VA alone. Always bring a witness and have somebody there to document whatever the hell's going on, because the VA will screw you 8 ways to Sunday, right? So when I would have to go to the VA and do blood work and everything else, my wife would always say, how's his liver enzymes, right? And my liver was always fine, okay? And she would get frustrated, not in a frustrated way where she thought where she didn't love me, in a frustrated way with like, man, I wish his liver would start bitching at him so he would stop drinking, right? Okay. But nothing ever happened to my liver. No matter what I did to try and take myself down that road of suicide, something always interfered. And it wasn't my kids, it wasn't my wife, and again, I got to say that carefully because I in the end, in my book, I write, who's your Randy? Randy was my first suicide. That was the first one that struck me in the back of the head with a 2x4. And the pain that I felt always resonated with me. And in part, whenever I got close to my date with suicide, I could never do that to my wife. Okay. I'd like to say I couldn't do it to my kids as well, but my memory always kept going to my wife. Your kids will figure it out and they'll move on with their lives. They're on a mission and so on. But I just couldn't put my wife through that pain, and I couldn't leave her on her own to figure out the rest of life. All right. Because of how well she took care of me. I just couldn't do it. So
let me ask you a question real quick, because I want to ask you a question that in my over 1,300 interviews, I've never asked anybody. And it was because you brought it up, saying never go to the VA alone. Yeah. Why do you think so many veterans take themselves out in the parking lots of VAs?
Yeah, that's easy. That's a statement. It's a flat out statement. Okay. They don't want to go in there and, cause other people harm. Okay. But they want to make a statement. So I can't tell you how many people I've heard went into the VA to get help, got nowhere, walked out to the parking lot. And it's not that they sat there for an hour or anything else. It would be minutes. It would be seconds. And they would kill themselves right there in the parking lot. Okay. Some with notes, some without. But the bottom line is it is an absolute statement with their literal dying breath.
Okay, I just want to thank Paul and I want to thank Monica for hopping on, leaving notes for us, and thank you for showing up. So we know that those two are not going to be a statistic today because we're doing what we're doing. So thank you guys for showing up. Please share this out. So talk to us because and like I said, because of your book and because of my wife and because of my Lord, um, I didn't take myself out a couple weeks ago, but something I think saved me, and I did a post about this. I wrote my own obituary and I keep it in my wallet and I hold myself accountable to be that man in that obituary. I know that sounds kind of grim, but so many people I've talked to are like, you know what? I never thought about writing my own obituary. And for some people, it'll help. It saved me because I'm like, well, if it says that here lies Richard, a loving husband, a father, helping millions of people, then I have to be that man that I wrote about. So talk about that is, talk about a little bit about accountability and also about legacy.
About your legacy? I think you've got a great legacy.
I mean, just in general, because, a lot of people, I'm 55 and I know the average male lives to 78. I got 23 years left, but I want to make sure that, I'm leaving a legacy. So if I took myself out at 55, I'm not going to be able to have those 23 years to create a legacy. So talk about how selfish suicide actually is.
I want to be careful on how I say this. Okay. Because I'm caught. I spend every day in extreme physical pain, right? I've figured out the anxiety and the mental, and as I talk about in my book, the four corners of our sacred being: our physical, our mental, our spiritual, and our emotional bodies. I'm in a tremendous amount of pain physically, okay, just from the injuries and everything else. When I listen to some vets who are in so much pain, it is just a miserable existence. How can I pass judgment, so to speak, and say that it's selfish if they end their life? Is it? Listen, it's up to everybody to make their own conclusion. So like trauma, we all deal with trauma in our own ways. So for me, judging anybody else's trauma is just wrong. Everybody has to judge their own trauma. Okay. So I feel the same way about suicide. Okay. Um, I'm not encouraging anybody to use pain as an excuse, but my leading thoughts on suicide right now are pain based. Okay. That doesn't mean I'm going to go kill myself in an hour. It just means I spend a fair amount of time walking around saying, this isn't all that pleasant. All right. So to kind of circle back to that, I think that if every person, especially veterans, think about the price that other people have to pay for our suicide, that's where I think a lack of willingness or wantonness to be selfish kind of kicks in. We have to be unselfish and suck it up and finish this life, okay, to benefit others. And that's what keeps me going. If I sit here and focus on myself, then I'm in trouble. If I sit here and focus on helping others, then I can keep doing this. Okay. Every day before I get up, I pray. And every night when I go to bed, I pray. And I constantly say to myself, give me the strength to help others. Because if you're asking me, God, to help myself, it's not happening. Okay. I'll help others. You figure out a way to take care of me. I hope that rant came across right. I really do.
No, that came across great. But the way I look at it is the reason I started this podcast, because I wanted to see how people that were doing worse than I am or living better than I am. Like my first interview ever was a gentleman. He had both legs and both arms blown off in Afghanistan. And as I'm interviewing him, he's in a hot tub he's skiing with his family in Aspen. He's got no arms and no legs, and he's living a better life than me. I want to like, okay, all right, I lost 60% of my vision, but you're doing way better than I am. How'd you do it? And then like, I just interviewed a friend of mine. He just got done running the Badwater 135 in the desert in July, no eyesight, deaf, and almost beating David Goggins' record. So, wow. You know, so for me, I'm always like, okay, that's why I started the show. It's like, okay, you've been through the shit. How did you get on the other side? So, you know, even if I complain, you know, whatever, I'm blind, but this guy just ran a Badwater 135 miles, deaf and blind, and I'm going to complain. So that's why I started the podcast, to give people hope, because there is hope out there, right? And also, if we're Christians, if you believe in God or a higher power, Jesus, I believe in baby Jesus. I know there's more after this life, but I believe, and it saved my life a lot of times. The only reason I didn't take myself out, because I'm like, maybe I'm not going to get into heaven if I take myself out. So maybe this temporary situation that I'm having now is going to be a permanent solution that I may not want later. So talk about as far as the Christian perspective goes.
Yeah. So for me, my faith is kind of a split between the classic belief in the Bible and Christianity, Catholic, right? My wife is 100% Irish and as Irish Catholic as you can imagine. Okay. But my belief and faith in my Native American heritage and how I see Great Spirit and all the things that go along with that, I have a balance and a mix of loving the baby Jesus and believing in my ancestral spiritual background. Okay. And to me, it works perfectly because so many things align. You know, my Native American beliefs are parallel with the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. My Native American beliefs have that same approach. So for me, I don't so much worry about the consequences of what the Bible says of suicide. Okay, again, that's for me. All right, because of all the different ways I believe God operates. Okay, but I also think that if I don't do it right this time, I might have to come back here and do this whole flipping thing over again until I get it right. So I always joke with my wife, right? Joke half-heartedly. I say to her, man, we got to get this crap figured out, because if God sends us back here and, makes us do it again until we get it right, I don't want to keep reliving this life. So let's keep figuring it out and keep moving forward.
Okay. So me and you align on a lot of different things. And
we're good looking. And we're good looking, Sir Richard. Got to put that in there.
That I can't help. That's just natural. And I'm humble about it. So, but I think gratitude is such an important part of recovery. I'm in recovery 35 years. I haven't tasted a drink of alcohol or drugs in 35 years. So, but I believe, like for me, one of my hacks, and I tell all my listeners, one of my hacks that's changed me is when I go to bed at night, I wrap my arm around my wife and I pray for my wife. I pray for her happiness. I pray for her health, and pray she knows that I love her. And then I pray for my dog that's laying next to us. But then I thank God for 3 things that happened during my day. And this interview is definitely going to be one of them. And I just thank the Lord for the day that I had. And then if I wake up in the morning, which I've woken up 100% of the time, so when I wake up in the morning and if I can see something, I literally sit up in my bed and I say, Lord, today's going to be a great day. I don't know what you have for me, good, bad, but I accept it all. Today's going to be a great day. Thank you. So before my feet hit the floor again, I gave thanks before I went to bed. So I went to bed with gratitude, and then I woke up with gratitude. So my day is, of course, is going to be a lot better because my whole day it starts with gratitude. So talk about your gratitude and how gratitude has helped you in your recovery.
Well, the biggest thing that I have gratitude towards right now is all of those folks who have read my books and post 5-star reviews with a write-up saying how the book made them feel, their recommendations and outlining certain things, especially with the book A Date with Suicide, because, like you had said earlier, I've had a number of folks reach out and say I was all set to kill myself until I read your book, and your book stopped me from going down that path. So that's something that I'm incredibly grateful for, but it is intensely humbling. Okay. And I'm transferring that gratefulness back to God, to Great Spirit, because it's his power that gave me the strength to put those words to paper. And the way the words come out, I absolutely believe it's God, spirit world talking through me, because I don't think I'm that smart. And a lot of people have said, what you write is resonates with us. So sometimes I read my own stuff and go, man, I'm grateful this guy wrote this book. And I'm like, wait a minute, I wrote this crap. Holy cow. Right. So I'm grateful for my wife. We've been together, as I like to say, 50 years. Okay. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for where I am right now and what's in front of me. And I try to keep it that simple. But the biggest thing I got to tell you, Sir Richard, I am grateful and humbled by everybody that reads the book and then passes along a message. So keep the comments coming, keep writing the 5-star reviews, and know this. I stole this from Dr. Fraser Crane. I'm listening.
And I love it. So talk to us for the last couple of minutes. Like when I wrote my book, I'm a 9th grade dropout again, and I have no grammar whatsoever. The only grammar I had was grandma and grandpa, so I didn't have any grammar. But for me, when I wrote the book, it was very heartbreaking, but it was very cathartic. But I had to rip open a lot of old wounds to heal. And I had to ask people, did this really happen? Because I was too drunk to remember. And one of my big things, and I mention all the time when I talk about my first book, was my dad actually helped bail me out of jail. And I never knew it until he passed 3 years ago. And so now anytime I mention my book, I'm like, Dad, help me bail me out. So I always add that in there. So what was it like writing your books, and as you keep going, do they go get more deeper and more personal?
So the answer is yes to the last part. They do. The hardest thing for me to do was to start the process. And I wrote my first book 4 or 5 times and threw it out 7 or 8 times and then started over, because my philosophy, my thought process was, who the hell's ever going to read this crap? Why does anybody want to listen to my story? And again, my first book talks about my childhood, and my wife didn't know anything about it until I handed her a copy of the book when it was published. And then she sat down and read it and didn't talk to me for a handful of days because she was traumatized. She was upset. Right. And when she finally started looking at me and able to talk without crying, she said to me, man, you weren't abused. You were tortured. Okay. This story could be relabeled as a Stephen King horror story, Okay. And in that scenario, I could probably sell a couple million copies as a horror. Right. But once I started writing, I started remembering things that I stuffed into my sea bag, like you were saying, Sir Richard, right? You know, did this really happen? I actually had to go see my sister and have a conversation with her and say, so I'm writing a book and it's about my childhood. And she goes, oh boy, right? And I had to ask her, I said, listen, this is what I remember. Did this happen? And she said, yes. And then I started down that path and she reminded me of things that were even more brutal. Okay. So brutally, to be brutally honest, there's stuff that I haven't put in these books that would, you know, that would really make you cringe. Okay. When I finally came to terms post the last book, A Date with Suicide, at that point in time, all, you know, the relief that came off of me, the freedom that started filling the energy around me and my insides was and still is amazing. Okay. It's like drowning. Okay. And then all of a sudden you're kind of plucked out of the middle of the ocean and you're put on a boat. You can still see all the waves. You're still wet from being in the water, but that feeling of elation starts to flood you. And that to me is what happens when you finally start telling your story and talking about trauma. And if I may caveat that thought, you know, people say to me, well, I don't really want to tell, you know, my story. It's blood and guts and it's this and that or whatever it is. And I'm like, listen, you don't have to get into the details. I'm not suggesting, you know, to say that I saw a body part or, you know, whatever it is. Okay. But tell your story in a way that opens up your heart and soul and releases the pent up, built up energy. And when you look at the last chapter of my book, I get deep into the weeds with teaching the 4 sacred parts of our existence: our physical, our mental, our emotional, and our spiritual bodies. Okay. And I use the examples like, if you've ever had love as a young, you know, puppy love, or, you know, you've loved somebody at a time, right? Where does love resonate? Is it in your head, your heart, your spirit, right? Your emotions? Well, it's in all of it, right? Because if you were dating the woman that you absolutely loved and they dump you, they break up with you, listen, you can't eat, right? You can't sleep. You can't concentrate. Your emotions are a nightmare. Your physical body shuts down. So when I try to explain to people the power of telling your story, attached to that is, as you tell your story, you're relieving the pent up, stored up, built up energy inside the 4 corners of your existence. So it's not just a matter of trying to free your mind or free your heart or your soul, okay, or your spirit. It's about freeing all of those by one simple step, and that's telling your story. Again, most ventures just want to be heard, okay? So telling your story, again, is why I'm here to say I'm listening.
You know, and something I want to bring up. I was talking to one of my friends yesterday. I'm going to be helping her out. She's a doctor in the UK, and we're going to be talking about helping veterans in the United Kingdom also. But something I told her, and she didn't realize that 1 in 3 girls are abused and molested. 1 out of every 5 boys are abused and molested. And the average person combined, when they finally tell their story, if they tell their story, is 53 years old. So some people are living with this stuff 45, 50 years. If they don't take themselves out, they're living a tortured soul for 53 to 55 years old. And only 10 to 20% of the people that are abused tell their story. So I think what you're saying is exactly true, that you need to tell somebody your story. Whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's church member, whether it's professional help, you need to get it out, because if you don't get it out, it's going to eat you from the inside out, right?
Yeah, there's going to be an explosion. Okay. It's just what? Is it an explosion of relief and release? Or is it an explosion that involves law enforcement and an ambulance? It's coming out sooner or later.
So, okay, now this is a teaching podcast. So today's the 12th, June 12th, 2012, 6/12/24. So if there's somebody that's listening to us now or in the future, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice for somebody if they're struggling with their mental health to start to get some help?
Tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. Okay. I mean, I don't mean to make light of that, but I think it was Monica that posted up in the chat. I was trying to read it, but I think she was talking about the motorcycle and letting go of the handlebars. Okay. Listen, I did it. It was funny that I remember that when she was writing it, doing 130, 140 on back roads, on a borrowed bike back when I was 25, 24, 25, 26. I wasn't intentionally taking the motorcycle and doing 130 and change because I was going to kill myself. But as the process was going through, I didn't care whether I lived or died. So the 3 things that I would tell everybody is recognize those signs that are not necessarily a scream for help about suicide. So pay attention to the warning signs of your own physical body, and your mind and your spirit. If you're doing 130 on a bike and you let go of the handlebars, you're not being reckless. You're trying to set a date with suicide. Okay. That's your warning sign that tells you need to find a way to talk to somebody. Okay. And when I started this, I didn't tell anybody what I was doing, not a mental health provider, nobody. So I just sat down and told my story by typing into the computer. When I originally started to do it, I started writing by hand. So I told my story without telling anybody, and then that ended up developing into a book. Okay. So the big takeaways, you got to tell your story. Okay. The second is it's coming out one way or another. All right. And the last one is I'm here. So please don't ever think that you don't have somebody to tell your story to. I'm happy to sit there, listen to you. I'm happy to come find you, have a cup of coffee. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat someplace where we've never said anything, just sat there for an hour or 2 hours. And then that other person says, thank you. And even though we've never exchanged a word, I know exactly what was going on. He just needed somebody. So when a veteran calls you and says, I need to talk, we all need to stop instantly what we're doing and go have that conversation. Because I guarantee you when a vet calls, he needs help. Okay. Most likely doesn't know how to tell you he needs help. Right. The call is the call for help.
I love it. But something like, you mentioned, and I want to bring this up. I think it's important that, my wife won't read my book, and she won't go see me speak because my mother, my abuser, is still in my life. So she's like, if I read that, she's like, somebody's going to get hurt. So sometimes the people around you are not going to want to hear your story. So that's why sometimes it's even better to go get professional help. I got a lot of help through AA, getting, my sponsors and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be the people that are around you, right?
Yeah. Listen, I am constantly connecting veterans or the family members of veterans with mental health providers. Okay. I can't tell you how many, reach outs I get that say, I need help. Can you point me in a direction? All right. So your thoughts on your wife not attending these things, that's healthy. That to me it is. That's a good thing. Okay. Because there are certain things that my wife would not want to, can't be in the room when I'm having certain conversations because it just affects her too much. So I understand what your wife is saying, and I agree with her.
Okay, so then how do we find your book? How do we get in touch with you? How do we get you to support? Because I know if I just message you on any social media, if you don't have anything going, you're like, hey bro, what's up? How you doing? How can I support you? So where can we get the book, and how can we get in touch with you and support your mission?
Yeah. First and foremost, the book that I just released is called A Date with Suicide by D Paul Fleming. It's available on Amazon. I mean, you can get it at any of the bookstores online. Okay, I'm not sure what stores it's actually in, but if you have a local bookstore and you want to buy it from them, just call them up and tell them to get copies of D Paul Fleming's book, A Date with Suicide. Another book that you're really going to love is 2,442 Steps to Crazy. Okay, I know, Sir Richard, that if you read this thing, it might just set you on a path to telling another story in a book yourself. But you can also go to my website, dpaulfleming.com, and connect with me there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Those are the two that I kind of pay attention to. I'm on some of the other social medias, but those are the main ones. I'm also I just got invited to Missouri, Rolla, Missouri, for June 29th. There's a great group out there doing veteran music events. So there's roughly going to be about 4,000 people there. I was invited out to be a part of it, and I'm working on some podcasts with some vets out there. So I'm out there on the 29th. If anybody wants to go to a great veteran, mostly country, I think, musical, all vet bands, so reach out to me on Facebook, on Twitter, or buy the books on Amazon.
Well, I'm following you, and everywhere I'm stalking you, brother. You know that. As I said when I first started, anybody that's listening, I'm offering my first book, for free. Just send me your email. I'll send you right over to your email. But if you want to get my newest book, which is a #1 bestseller on Amazon, if you want to start your own podcast, if you buy the autographed copy for $30, you get an autograph, some handwritten gifts and stuff like that. But then you get over $1,000 in bonuses. So if you just want the ebook, it's on Amazon for $1.99. So if you guys are interested in how to start a podcast or how to have a podcast with over 2 million downloads and 20 paying sponsors, just write podcast down below. So, brother, that was normally my last thing, but I got one more question for you.
All good. I'll stay with you all day if you want.
Just because it's you, Big Sexy. Just because it's you, brother. So if there's somebody out there right now, because I believe somebody once said that if you're not close to God, you're the one that moved. He's there from the beginning, the end, the Alpha, the Omega. If somebody's struggling with their faith, what can they do in the next 24 hours to finally get some peace in their life?
So do what I did. And that's when I was at my breaking point and I didn't know what to do. I just sat back in my chair. I closed my eyes. I turned on some Native American drumming and flute music, and I started breathing. Started breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth. And in 5 minutes, my anxiety disappeared. It didn't disappear for long. It only disappeared for a few seconds. But that sitting there quietly, trying to calm my mind, was a turning point in my battle with not just suicide, but with mental health issues. Okay. So no matter, and it was also a starting point for me to re-engage deeply in my spirit, in my faith. Okay. Because as I did that, and I said, wait a minute, if you're telling me that I don't have to do the kumbaya and put my fingers together and go om and do all this meditation, listen, that's great for some people. It's not for me. But what I realized was I can learn to meditate myself. And in part, I was actually reconnecting with my faith, because we all know what happens when you close your eyes and you try to calm your brain, you start seeing images that kind of flash through your mind, right? Well, some of those images that flashed through my mind when I first started learning to meditate helped me realize that finding my way back to faith is a critical step and a piece of finding balance, grounding, and reconnecting with God's light. All right. Again, it's a piece. Some people take it way too far. It's all good, right? But for me, it's a piece of balancing the whole me and allowing the original D Paul Fleming to come back out and blossom as an old man, but as an old man whose true soul is finally making a full-time appearance in this lifetime.
And I love that, guys. And as you know, I always end this way every show with this. Um, Today I decided to go wear all white because I knew the man was going to be here today. Summer's coming, so I wanted to look special. But my t-shirt says, today I decided not to become a statistic. And like Joel Osteen says, and I quote him all the time, we have a choice. Every day we wake up, we could be a victim or we could be a victor. And if you guys listen to this show, you are victors of your present and your future. You're no longer victims of your past. So guys, thank you for always showing up in force. I love you guys and I'm so grateful for you. And brother, I just want to say thank you. I'm truly humbled and grateful for your friendship.
Well, I've enjoyed the podcast with you, and I'd like to ask all the viewers, if you'd like to see more podcasts with Sir Richard and I, post some comments, post some likes, and if Richard sees an excited public out there, I'd be happy to come back on and bend your ear for an hour at a time and, have some fun while we talk about some very, very tough issues. Thank you for having me on.
I love you, brother. And guys, remember, vertical momentum. The only way to go is up. I love you guys, and I'll see you in about 40 minutes.